I know. Now,
It's a good thing you're.
I was afraid we had a meeting and I was missing it.
Okay, welcome.
Sorry.
We are live. Good morning. It's Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and we are here continuing our work on housing and how can we respond both post July 23 flooding and how do we continue to keep housing affordable and create more housing and address the barriers that we all need to address. So today we have two of our strongest affordable housing advocates and developers in the state. We're thrilled to have and welcome Kathy and Zeke. And Kathy, why don't you start? It's good to see you. We're mostly seeing the top of you. We could see more of your lower chin. Yeah, much better. And Kathy, I think you know all of us, but for both you and Zeke, we'll just quickly go around the table. I'm Allison Clarkson, Vice Chair, and Windsor County.
Ann Cummings from Washington County and Stowe. Kathy of the Stowe Housing Company.
Randy?
Randy Brock, President, part of Grand Isle County.
Wendy Harrison, Windham County, we've met.
Yep. So welcome. Kathy, why don't you start? We have a nice stretch of time, and we'd really love to, as you know, we have the opportunity to productively address some of the barriers affordable housing faces with Act 250. And we would love to hear about those, but also any other challenges and things we could help fix that are statutory in nature that we could actually address here in this body. Anything we can do to roll out more.
Thank you so much, Senator Clarkson, and I certainly hope I leave time for a conversation. And I also just wanted
our chair needs to introduce herself. She is sadly under the weather, but Keisha, do you want to just say hi? Keisha's here. She's just
I'd rather not get on video right now because I'm in pretty miserable shape. But Keisha Rum-Hinsdale from Chittenden County, and I've spoken, I think, to most of our witnesses in some form today about what we're hoping to hear.
Yeah, great, terrific. So Kathy, if you would lead off, that would be great, and Zeke, we'll turn to you.
Sure, thanks so much. And I apologize I'm not there in person today. I do hope I get another chance to join the committee, and I'll try to do so in person. And I also just want to say that I'm really glad Zeke Davidson is joining the conversation this morning, because whether you're a nonprofit real estate developer or a private real estate developer, we all face the same challenges. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of balancing risk and the expenditure of pre-development spending in real estate development. And this is particularly an issue for permitting. So when a developer is working on a potential parcel for multifamily housing, the value of that land is not vested until the local permit is in hand. And in fact, it's not vested until you're past the appeal period. So the developer is laser focused on getting that local permit and getting to an appeal-free status before spending significant resources to advance the project. In some communities with a robust zoning ordinance and technical review by municipal departments, obtaining that local permit can take at least a year long, and you go through a 3-step process: sketch review, preliminary plat, and final plat. And I know Zeke is very familiar with this. These are the communities that have a very robust planning and zoning and are equipped to administer the, in my mind, are exactly the communities where the Act 250 permit is redundant. So when we think about that, if we can eliminate the redundancy of an Act 250 permit, that means not only will we spend less money on, the application fee, but it really cuts out quite a bit of time. And it's why I'm supportive of the Act 250 exemption in the to be defined designated areas. So, there's the cost issue, there's the permit application fee cost issues, but in some ways it's the time and it's the risk of another appeal that's going to slow down the developer from making the necessary investments to get to construction drawings, to going out to bid, and to getting to a construction loan closing. If there's an Act 250 permit that's required, it's pretty common practice that the developer does not submit the Act 250 application until you have that local permit in hand, because again, you want to pace your expenditures. The Act 250 fee is based on a percent of construction, and as you know, construction costs have increased by 30% in the past 2 years. That means the Act 250 fee just automatically increases by 30%. In our projects, it is nearing where we do have Act 250 is nearing 2,000 a unit. I want to acknowledge that the priority housing project exemption we have used frequently, and I would say the majority of our projects have not have benefited from an exemption from Act 250 under the priority housing project framework. The Act 250 fee is written at the time of submitting the application and is not refundable.
Kathy, can I just interrupt to ask you, why haven't they benefited from the priority housing exemption? That's why it hopefully exists. Why haven't your projects benefited from that?
The majority of our projects have.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought
Have
they
or
have.
have not?
They have benefited. That's what I
Have.
thought.
Okay.
I mean, it's certainly the intention.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sorry, we just all heard it. Have not. So that's great. Thank you.
Great.
Sorry, I
Great.
just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. So there are many other permit fee costs. You know, there's the town permits, there's impact fees. But another state permit that is based on construction costs is the Division for Fire Safety for your building permit. And it's a very similar fee rate structure. And it's based on construction costs. So I thought I would just give you one example, and I hope this is some of the testimony you wanted to hear, but it's not uncommon for larger projects to have spent over $1 million in pre-development spending before you get to that construction loan closing, which is like the final exam for a developer. And at our 68 unit project in Shelburne named Bay Ridge, we paid an Act 250 application fee of almost $104,000, and we'll be writing a check to the Division for Fire Safety for a check in the amount of $202,000. So our total permit fee cost for those two permits is $306,000. That's a lot. I know both. I know both agencies have to administer their programs, but
right. Of course, that is sort of the challenge.
Yeah.
When we have Randy.
Just to understand, those permits are for how many properties, how many individual units would be?
That was for 68 rental units. That was for one project, 68 rental units.
68 rental units, and the total permit cost again is?
Those are just those two.
306,000.
And those are just two permits, because there are many other permits you have to get.
Yeah, that's in a way one of the things that would be very, very helpful to try to understand, and if whether it be from you or whether it be from other sources that might be able to provide it to us. I would love to see a variety of projects and to look at the permits associated with those projects in total to see what is the burden of permitting overall throughout the state on typical projects that are being built today. Because one of the things, and again, I know this is a wild idea, but one of the things that we certainly do have at our control is the cost of permitting. Many people say that the cost of permits is one of the things in Vermont that makes it A, difficult to build, and B, discourages building, and particularly for builders who build elsewhere, moves building to other locations. We can control those costs. We can control those costs by doing wild things like, for a period of time, eliminating all building costs and having the state absorb them.
Well, then we just shift them as, this is a budgetary conversation.
It is a budgetary conversation, that's absolutely right. We may shift them to things that represent critical emergencies on the one hand, as opposed to other things that do not. But that's a separate fiscal discussion to have.
Well, we shift as, this is a separate conversation, but we have many parts of state governments that are financed by, in a fee-based system. DMV is a good example, NRB. There are many. So the minute you shift from fees, you move it into the general fund. And so then we have to be willing to add to the general fund. And
Well, linking the fee to the cost of construction, the cost of construction has skyrocketed.
Yes.
We saw the charts yesterday.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the cost of doing the Act 250 litigation have skyrocketed at the same rate. It's probably gone up, and there's probably a few years in the back. But to hit projects, it's kind of a double whammy. It's going to cost them more to, do a project, and they're not getting that much better service for a 300% increase in fees. So
yeah,
you
no,
might want to look at that.
I think it's absolutely worth looking at because it appears to be a significant percentage
Yeah.
Of construction costs. And when we have a crisis in that we're not getting housing built, we can deal with the price of increasing the fee of DMV, but the DMV license holder is not going to license his or her car in New York and New Hampshire. They don't have a choice, but here builders do have a choice as to where they build and what they build.
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Would you like a further fly in this ointment? We're looking
Why not?
at the property tax, 18%. We're working at that. But that increase, because residential is under the 5% cap, the 18%
Those
will
who pay
fall on,
income sensitivity, right.
will fall on to businesses, and rental units are businesses.
Right.
So that's going to push all your rents up that much farther. We will fix this.
Yeah, we will.
Just one comment.
Yeah.
Or suggestion. I think we should start with the figuring out what it costs us to
Yes.
manage those permits.
Yeah.
And start with that rather than just assuming that what we're charging now is the right amount to charge.
Right.
But then we do need a mechanism to eventually recover our costs or make a decision that we're going to
Shift how we pay for it.
Right.
Yeah.
But just be very conscious about what it's going to.
Or manage our costs and at least understand what the elements are that are
Yes.
going into the
Right.
costs that we are theoretically recovering.
So
Yes.
we can have that conversation, and we can ask NRB back, for example, on just this. But we can also talk to Jane about that. So Kathy, continue.
Just thank you so much. Just a couple more comments because I want to make sure Zeke has some time to talk as well. There's one other permit that's rarely discussed, and when you are getting ready to start construction, you pull, some towns call it a zoning permit, some towns call it a building permit. It's issued by the zoning administrator, and it comes with a 15-day appeal period. And we have never understood why this permit has an appeal period, and even on what basis it would be appealed. And I'm going to try to get you the statutory language for that, but it would be interesting to see if that might be a permit where an appeal period is not. I mean, it would be catastrophic to be appealed when you are a week away from trying to start construction.
Yeah.
That probably comes from the old days when the zoning administrator could do
Did everything.
whatever he wanted. And, yeah, you just went in and you.
That's
didn't
our
have to
fear.
go- Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Kathy, is that a possibility for every town that has a zoning administrator?
Well, and every town does have a zoning administrator that has zoning.
Yeah.
Can I ask you just a question
Yeah.
about permitting? So even if you don't go through the town, I'm sorry. What I'd like to know is how the permits that are not done by the town, the A&R permits, how do those factor into this? And how expensive are those? Like the wastewater, and, the storm. I'm not
Stormwater, wastewater, all those
stormwater,
permits.
really.
And how efficiently do you get?
Right.
Those fees are
How do those?
those fees are pretty minimal.
Okay. that's good to know. So is the time frame is good for those two?
That's another story. We should have another, we should have a whole
But I-
nother section to talk about that.
Yeah,
We
experiences.
actually, you know what would be great for us to have is a chart.
a flow
A
chart.
flow chart of fees and time frame, and
Mhm.
what would really help us, because that
Mhm.
is, because both time frame and cost of fees are clearly an impediment. Everyone expects that there is a cost to regulation, so there, you know, a minimal fees we understand, but we need to understand how, what a barrier they are for development, and and.
Well, it's also time. I mean,
Yes, that's why I'm
having
asking
had
for
to
it.
cite a water filtration
Yeah.
plant. If they have 90 days to give you a decision, they will see you on the 89th
Ninth
day.
day, yeah.
There is never any thought that you might get it on the 10th day.
Right.
And so, and it's, well, you know, you pay this money then and we'll tell you later and what it's going to cost. You might have to do mitigation at some point in the future. Well, is that going to cost me $3 million or $30?
Right.
So-
There's all this kind of time and economic uncertainty that you
Yes.
leave.
So and those are the things that we were hoping to alleviate, is some of the uncertainty and reduce some of the time and reduce some of the cost. But Kathy, is that something your team could undertake as a flow chart, or
Oh,
to give us a notion of
I'll see if we can take a shot at it. Yeah.
that, you know, I hate to say this, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think all of us would appreciate seeing that in one place.
Yeah, and to make it maybe easier, just look at one particular project. Because,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know, showing all the possibilities could be really complicated, but just look at one particular project.
right.
And-
And one in a robust, a town that has robust zoning and planning.
Yeah.
Because those are the ones we're hoping to exempt, but we need to, yeah, that would be great. That'd be very helpful. So you
Give
had
it a
2 more
shot.
points. Sorry, hate to ask, but you know,
More jobs to do.
we don't have any staff I can delegate that to.
Right.
And it's really important that we understand the process.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had 2 more points. One was your,
I just want to say that, you know, on a more positive note, huge thanks for the investment by this legislature for us to build more housing. And I'm sure Zeke is going to, has a similar very full pipeline. Our pipeline is almost double what it used to be. We have almost 200 units under construction and another 350 in pre-development. So I know we're not building as fast as you'd like us to, but we are trying our hardest.
no, and it's true. We think, we've allocated over $500 million in the last 3.5 years. And what are we seeing for that? I mean, that's always a question.
Yeah.
And so every unit counts, so.
And
thanks.
550 units is a good amount. That's not insignificant.
Yeah, and that includes Gus's project. No, that doesn't include Gus's project.
Those are only Evernorth. That's Evernorth and our partners across the state. Many of you are familiar with our partners that we're working with.
Yeah. Okay. So did you have a couple other things
No.
you wanted?
No, I really appreciate your time and I apologize again for not being there in person.
Well, we appreciate your work.
Can I ask, because
Yeah.
we have, both of them are until 10, right?
Yeah,
So.
we have
just-
a stretch of time.
Well, your first sentence, Kathy, if you could just go back to that, you said something about the value isn't established until a certain point. And I think that point is when all the permits are done. But that seems to be a very important statement. Do you remember what you
I'm not
said?
sure it was valid.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of
Yeah,
basic.
the land value not vested until the permit's complete.
Yeah, I mean, you got nothing until you've got that local permit. Honestly, what do you
Right.
have? You have unpermitted land. And until you have that local permit vested, is there now value that's related to the value of building the multifamily housing? You know, quite honestly, if you need an Act 250 permit, you're not really still vested yet, right? You're still spending money, not knowing if you're going to be able to build it.
Okay, so you're still in a speculative
Oh
situation.
yeah, that's the high risk money. That's
Okay,
That's the money that makes you nervous.
Okay, I just wanted to just highlight, that's
Yeah, but
important.
so what would be interesting, I think, to go to that flow chart and to that time frame is, so we buy a piece of land, you finally, I mean, just even getting to the buying a piece of land, from citing a property that works for these projects right through to when we start construction would really be, and then even actually through the end of construction, because there are permits at the end, right? The habitability permits, aren't there permits at the end as well?
Yeah, certificate.
The certificate of occupancy, right?
That's-
So it would be really great to have from citing purchase of land right through to the COO, what's it called? The
Certificate of occupancy,
CO,
yeah.
CO, right. That I think would be very helpful for
Yeah.
those of us who are not living in that world, as completely as you are.
I'm glad you've taken the laboring oar, Kathy, but we'll send you what we have too. We can
Oh,
team up on
great.
this one.
That would really be terrific. Zeke, well, come join us at the
Sure.
table. Actually, you should have been doing that, and then Kathy could have seen you more
Well,
fully.
we'll panel this one now with Kathy. This is good.
Okay, great. Zeke, welcome back.
Thank you
It's
all.
good
I
to
know.
have you back. We've had you in the past, and it's good to have you
And
again.
I'll touch on a little bit what we touched on last year, actually, some updates. I'm gonna share a presentation I prepared. I hope it doesn't, well, Kathy's off video anyway, so it'll lose her on it.
And just introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, let me, get this going. I want to join with audio. I'm Zeke Davison, Summit Properties, COO of Summit Properties. We're the state's largest, what do you see? You see in this? Private developer of affordable housing. I mean, between Evernorth and Summit, we account for the biggest majority of affordable housing development in the state. I ostensibly came in because I want to talk a little bit about some updates on some projects that have been affected by legislation you've worked on in the last couple of years, provide some reactions to H 719 and be here to answer any questions.
Well, 719 hasn't passed the House, but some of the
Correct.
and
Specifically
we've
the
been-
Act 250 concept, I guess. Which is
I think
sort of-
let's focus on Act 250.
Yes,
We've
correct.
been reminded by our Secretary of the Senate that we really should be focusing on concepts and ideas
Correct.
and proposals in front of us,
I
not.
won't say
spec-
719, I'll
Oh,
say
yeah.
Act 250.
Let's talk about Act 250.
That's great, that's great. And by the way, I listened to Maura's testimony from Tuesday on the
Yep.
way over here, and then, the last half hour with Kathy, I couldn't have asked for better precursors
Yeah,
to
you've been teed up
to
well.
mine. I've been teed up extremely well. I'm glad I'm going third. So quick background on Summit. I know I did this for you all last year. Largest private developer of affordable mixed income community. We also manage homes. So we've built about 1,200 rental homes, manage another 300. Some Evernorth projects we manage. Since 95, we've done about 20 low-income housing tax credit projects. I will refer to the low-income housing tax credit project as LIHTC going forward. I know you're all familiar with it, but wanted to introduce that the first time. The low-income housing tax credit project is really the biggest driver and threshold for affordable housing around the country, but certainly here in Vermont. Most of our properties are in Vermont, but we do manage some communities in the Upper Valley, New Hampshire, Bow, New Hampshire, and one in Queensboro, New York. But our focus, we're based in South
Queensbury,
Burlington.
I'm so glad you did. My deep affection for
It's a
Queensbury.
big independent senior living, affordable independent senior living community.
Not the Glen.
No, Cedars. Yeah. Just a couple of recent projects that you guys may have known. So Brandywine Lofts and Farmstead Lofts are in South Burlington on the O'Brien Farms, for those of you in Chittenden County community. I mean, these we just opened. The first building in November, the second building is opening next month. 94 units, 71 affordable, 20 families exiting homelessness. I want to sort of highlight this because this is the classic ARPA era funded project. Bigger in scale than normal, and higher in cost than normal. This took $16 million worth of LIHTC equity. One building was a 9%, one building was a 4%, two different programs in the LIHTC program. Took $6.5 million of federal ARPA funding awarded through VHCB, $1 million in CDBG, and then took local ARPA, state tax credits, VHIF. If you again, I just listened to Maura's testimony in the car, but you guys had a layered colored cake, I think. This is that layered colored cake. I mean, this project took all of that. But it's also the biggest delivery, one-time delivery of affordable housing in the state in more than a decade. And this is what ARPA allowed us to do.
This is a triumph.
It is. We had a great grand opening on December 13th, about a month ago. Maura, Gus, everybody there, it was great.
Well, we weren't there.
I think you were invited.
I hope Keisha was there,
I
because,
think we were.
Keisha had a conflict, but I sent her pictures.
yeah,
So,
great, how exciting, really
great.
terrific.
And we're 2 months in now to managing this, and including managing it with, mixed income. They're market rate units. They're units that are affordable at the classic, 60% of AMI, and they're families exiting homelessness. And we've learned a lot. We have a ton of successes. We've got some challenges I actually want to touch on at the end here.
Yes, because which we touched on a little bit yesterday in our public hearing.
Okay, I didn't see yesterday's hearing,
Randy.
Affordable housing, what did they cost per unit?
I'm gonna get there. Can I punt on that?
Yeah,
'Cause I got a graphic that I think is gonna help articulate that.
And the total cost on this project?
32 million.
What?
32 million.
32.
Yeah.
So the tax credits were just half of it.
Yeah, correct. And again, we'll get into that in a second.
But probably the biggest single.
Correct. These projects just don't happen without tax credits, and big new construction just doesn't happen without the 9% tax credit project. Now, again, I'm gonna get to this,
Okay.
but there are only 3 or 4 projects a year that get those.
Yeah.
The importance of it is huge. But that's got a cap, because our VHPA's ability to allocate, what they're allocated in tax credits has a cap, and it's certainly not tracked construction costs. Our next project, and we discussed this last year, I came to you specifically on S100, specifically about some of the Act 250 provisions in it that got watered down after it left this committee. I testified to those committees too. But to step back, this is 200 unit master planned community that's going through this 3-step zoning process that Kathy laid out. We just received in December our preliminary plat approval. Our hearing was in November. We got the memo in December. This is the #1 regional priority project, 2 years running in Addison County. We already have a $7.8 million award in the missing middle homeownership, which I know Maura is rebranding as either the Vermont Affordable Home Development or something. Missing income, middle income.
I think middle income is.
So she showed you that map and where all the distribution was, and you saw 37 units in the town of Middlebury. That's this project. This is exempt from Act 250 because of S100. By the time S100 was passed, I think if you guys remember, you were trying to eliminate some of the population-based caps on priority housing projects, and I came in arguing for that. That ended up being winnowed down to a 3-year window. I think we are going to be the only project in the state that is going to benefit at scale from S100. But what happened is, this is the most ambitious project being proposed outside of Chittenden County. We wouldn't have, and Kathy, I think, touched really well on the permit costs, the timing risks, all of that. But the bigger untold story is, if the town of Middlebury wasn't going for the neighborhood development area designation, which provided some relief from Act 250, and if the legislature wasn't considering extending the exemptions from Act 250 for priority housing projects, we just simply would not have taken this project on. The risk that Kathy speaks about is too great.
You're floating this on that risk.
What I always say when somebody asks about Act 250 is I say, listen, we can talk about the dollars per unit that it adds, and we can talk about the time that it adds. I've stolen Kathy's language from last year, which was we can plan for those. We know what those are going to be. The thing we can't plan for is the risk of appeal. And that is, at the end of the day, the thing that just chills development. And so when you say, like, what is the dollar? Like, apply that to your project. What is it costing? Like, that's we can do that. We can quantify it, but we can also plan for that. What we're unwilling to take the risk is a project that's going to be subject to Act 250, so we simply don't. And in practice, what that looks like, if somebody says, perfect parcel on public transportation, on public infrastructure, do you want to look at it? The first thing I'll do is I'll bring up the Vermont Planning Atlas, see if it's in a designated area. And if it's not, we will pretty much say no thank you. This project was subject to Act 250, but the O'Brien brothers had already gone through the brain damage of doing Act 250, paying the fees. They're in court right now. challenging those fees, but the work had been done. We accepted this project. This project, we wouldn't have gotten to this point if it weren't for the fact that we knew we would be exempt from Act 250. This is the only project that I think at scale, your tweaks last year made in S100, not your tweaks, by the time it got passed. Like, imagine the possibilities we could open that up to the whole state. And that's really, I think, what this tier 1 process is trying to do. For every town that wants growth, has public infrastructure, and has a professional zoning office, give them that flexibility, and give developers the opportunity to go in and say, I'm willing to commit the risk and the pre-development expenses that Kathy talked about to do this project.
Yeah,
That's
this is,
such a
I mean,
big
this could be, we could talk about this for hours. When you say at scale, how many units to you is scale?
Well, I guess you could sort of use the old population-based threshold stuff, caps, which were antiquated, but in a town of less than 10,000 people,
Yeah,
they sort of use 50 units, right? So Middleborough is a town of 9,200 people. So if we proposed in a priority housing project more than 50 units, we were going to be subject to Act 250.
Okay.
That's the trigger that S200 took out
okay,
for us. If you're building one building, you really can't build a tax credit building much
Yeah.
more than 35 to 45 units. So,
so what is that unit, the amount, like 100?
we're proposing
150,
200.
I
I was gonna say, this
I know,
is
that's what I'm saying.
225 housing units.
Yeah, but I just want to
Right, we have
just
a path-
understand where the threshold is, financially, not.
Yeah, and that's the thing is we've only got a clear path forward, applications in right now. I want to get, my next slide gets to cost. And
Okay.
I know we want to talk
That's
about
okay,
this.
this is all.
And we can talk about the feasibility. We've got a path forward through, lot 12 there, the big multifamily building on the side. And then the duplexes and sixplexes leading up to them.
Have you got any single family homes in there?
No, this is.
Our decision is not a
multiplex.
good use of this density. I mean, this is immediately adjacent to downtown
I was
Middlebury.
gonna say,
Okay.
this is right down, this is
Yeah.
pretty close to
Yeah, I
downtown.
mean, where Washington Street there and
Yeah.
Seminary Street come together, just past that is the Middlebury Natural Foods Co-op, the Shaw's, pharmacy, all the
This
amenities.
is
All right.
well located.
Is there any, commercial or live work?
No, this is zoned for, neighborhood development, so this is, it would be a conditional use to put in.
Okay.
And it's,
And so you keep you don't
We're-
want any conditional uses?
No, we're, again, permitting is easier.
Right,
when
but
there's
if
not.
it wasn't permitting, would
We-
you
We've done
consider that?
commercial spaces,
Yeah.
when we do dense infill, our last building, we opened prior to the Brandywine and Farmstead that we opened in 2021, we have a restaurant in. We focus on residential, but we'll do it when it works with the.
Okay.
but this is
Okay.
very close to commercial.
It's right there, and that's the.
So
Yeah,
it's
no, I'm
not
just
deep
curious.
next
Well,
to- yeah.
sometimes it helps to extend the commercial.
Oh,
whatever.
absolutely.
And just especially if it's walkable and on transit.
And we'll be bringing public transit in. Public transit comes already up from the neighborhood below and out, and then we're gonna build a transit shelter and it'll come through. So,
Well,
I mean, the siting of this is perfect. The fact that it was exempt from Act 250 and support from Maura and Gus and everybody, are the things that make this a reality. So, I mean, then to the practical, right? We just got our preliminary plat approval. We're planning on going to final on the first few phases, breaking ground this summer. If we were doing Act 250, we would be starting that Act 250 process now. 6 months, $150,000, risk of appeal, right? Again, we can plan for the 6 months and we can plan for the $150,000. It's just gonna take more money from Gus, more money from Maura. We can't plan for that risk. And that is the thing that's unpalatable when you start to put $1 million into a project that is worth nothing until you have the permits.
can I keep asking?
Yeah.
So does the town make sure that you're getting your stormwater permit and that kind of thing? The permits that you get from A&R separate,
Yeah.
that otherwise
and
Act 250 would.
Yeah, I mean, we
take care of?
can't pull our final permits until those are in place.
And the town makes sure that you have those?
Yeah, correct.
And you've started those, I would
Mhm.
expect?
Yeah, once we got our preliminary plat approval, that's pretty much the assurance that our civil plan, our infrastructure, all of that is in place. And then we can go and say, okay, let's apply for our stormwater, apply for our,
Because you know the stormwater rules and you
and
design it according to
we
those
designed it
rules.
accordingly and the town has approved the basic design and now we go to the state for that design. We now have enough assurance that that's not gonna change a lot. What the town requires isn't gonna change a lot.
Okay,
The preliminary plat is the town's assurance that what you laid out is good.
okay,
Come to us with this at final, with your final engineering and your permits, and we'll approve them.
okay.
And in terms of, just to tag on to that, what's in place, the NDA, has that been approved also?
Yep.
And is it quarter mile? What is the NDA around Middlebury?
Well, the NDA is a specific line that
So it-
includes this project. And I mean, even this is how this stuff is sort of entwined. I mean, the line was drawn to include this parcel specifically because of its developable opportunity immediately adjacent to town. And so the town was really prioritizing development here,
And when did the NDA come through?
January 23.
Oh, just a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, about this, you know, a month before I was here talking about these Act 250 changes.
So just to go to our, you know, as we develop the chart in our
Mhm.
brain, when did you buy this land?
So we didn't buy the land. So this is the other piece of this project, and I'll get to this in a second. Middlebury College purchased this land, and Middlebury College purchased this land in conversation with us about the developable opportunity, right? And we wouldn't have ever been in a speculative position to purchase the land. The college is desperate enough for workforce housing, but it knows it needs to bring some of its capital to the table to be able to do that. And they said, why don't we buy the land, enter a development agreement with you, and you guys hit the ground
So
running.
this is the bottom, this is the bottom of that cake, Mora's cake. This is the layer at the absolute bottom. You have to own the land and somebody has to help. I mean,
Sort of,
that
but the
helps.
layers, but Mora's layer is money, right? And so
Right, but
So
buying
it's
the
something,
land
when we
is money.
buy, right,
didn't have to
correct.
buy it.
When we buy the land, we'll have to buy the land as part of the acquisition from the college. And they're subsidizing part of it, so we're not gonna be paying back their full investment in this. But we will be paying something for the acquisition of the land, appraised value, whatever. And that will come out of that layer cake. I think that cake has, staying power as a metaphor.
Great
It's
example of-
great. It's
Yeah.
it's a great visual, even though, as Ann pointed out, the food coloring in it might kill us all.
So
But-
that's a
But the
great,
town gown stuff too is really good too, to have the college caring enough about
Oh, and in investing.
and invest, yeah.
so, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna, do you ever, write contracts, you know, for the land conditioned on, the sale is conditioned on your getting all your permits?
So that's how we always operate.
That's how.
So and there's also reasons technically with the low income housing tax credit program that we can't own the land or some of the environmental HUD's rules on the environmental approvals. You know, and Evernorth does the same thing. You enter an option agreement
Yeah.
with the owner of the land. And once we've set up financing and permits, we will close on the acquisition of the land at the same time we close on all that financing. And so that's how all of these, we never speculatively buy them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think so.
So this brings a lot of this together and a lot of what we talked about. So these 4 bars represent Summit's last 4 low-income housing tax credit projects. We've done a 9% low-income housing tax credit project every year, every other year since 2018. Farmstead Lofts that we just opened is the 3rd bar here. You guys are looking at this, right? And then the low-income housing tax credit project that we're proposing in Stonecrop Meadows and Middlebury, whose application is due to VHFA and VHCB in the next month or 2. That's the 4th bar here. The first 2 are Casa Van Overlook and Park Terrace, 2 projects we did across the street from each other in Winooski. Casa Van Overlook, we got our low-income housing tax credit award in 2018, opened it in 2019, and then Park Terrace, the award was 2020, opened in 2021. So Casa Van
Both
Overlook,
those dates on there, I just see
yeah, sorry,
finished
20.
dates.
No, they're there.
These are the dates of our tax credit award, and then they
Oh,
were
okay.
all finished a year later, right? So Farmstead Lofts says 2022, we just opened.
So
it.
tax credit, and then a year later, we can count on it being built, or started to be built.
We typically deliver in a year. I would say that's not typical.
No, that's really impressive, actually.
That's
yeah.
great.
So Casa Van Overlook, the layers on my cake, and again, I made this graphic before I heard Maura's testimony or saw her testimony. The blue is tax credit equity, right? So that's what the HFA awards us, tax credit award, and we go and sell that to the equity market, right? And so these were all max awards at the time. The state has a max allocation that hasn't changed much, right? The amount of units that tax credits can support is pretty consistent and has been since then, right? The state is creating 100 to 150 tax credit units a year or less, but the blue or the green is permanent debt. And then the yellow is the rest of Maura's cake. In 2018, when we were developing high quality, all electric, energy efficient tax credit units, we could do it for $250,000 a unit. Our line there is Summit. Those are just the total development costs. These are total development costs per unit, by the way. That the blue line is what the trend of our total development cost has been. The orange line is the statewide average. I do this to show you that we're more efficient than the average, and this is what our numbers are. Park Terrace 2 years later, small bump up, inflationary, a little faster than inflation.
Yeah, but
we were still mostly doing it with tax credit equity, permanent debt, and the yellow there that we were using, the other sources, was deferred developer fees and energy incentives. There was nothing else in those funding stacks. Farmstead Lofts, you saw my, Farmstead Lofts was one of 2 buildings, which had $1.5 million in ARPA and some other funding.
CDBG, which is.
CDBG, yeah, CDBG went to the 4% building, its neighbor.
Oh,
So
okay.
the brand
In my
new one.
stats, it's a Brandywine. In my stats, I aggregated those 2
Okay.
buildings, but only one of them was a 9% building, so
Okay.
I isolated that here.
Okay.
But the yellow, we required some soft sources, and this is state dollars. For the first time on our projects, these are money out of the state. Some of it was ARPA, obviously, but the first 2 was just the tax credit equity. So we took an allocation that the state could have made elsewhere, competitive funding, but we didn't take dollars to build it. Farmstead Lofts, we had to take dollars. You just couldn't do it anymore. Park Terrace, this is one of those war stories developers are going to tell for years. We signed all the contracts for Park Terrace pretty much a month before costs skyrocketed. We got extremely lucky that we were able to keep that down. I mean, if we had been 2 or 3 months later, again, we can talk about the implications of Act 250 and what if we'd been applied, we'd had to wait for that delay. What happens to construction costs? But we were able to keep that low. And so between 2020 and 2022 is where you see all that construction costs. Our next proposed building in Stonecrop Meadows, we're pushing almost $500,000 a unit. And we're probably going to be the only application this round under $500,000 a unit. Double, nearly double. And where does that come from? Morris Cake, right? So as I turned off the car before walking in here, I think you were starting to grill Maura on cost, and we were starting to have some of the policy arguments about, I think she called it a misnomer to talk about this, about housing. We're talking about homeless, the things that go into this truly affordable housing. She's right about that, but those are policy choices too, right? Policy choices I think we have to make for low-income housing, for tax credit projects. But if I had sort of one big takeaway on this, it's that some of this is outside of our control. Construction costs are outside of our control. Interest rates are outside of our control. We have to maximize the low-income housing tax credits we have every year. It's only going to be a handful of projects every year. And today's reality is that this yellow is required, and this yellow is state money. The next piece is, as we then think, we have to do this and, right? And that and is how do we use money more efficiently to build other types of units? And this gets back to my baseline argument. It's like, we need units. And I know you can accuse me of being like a doctor seeing something, they use a scalpel, like the developer is going to say, we just need to build more. But I think the research and all the testimony you've all heard is the biggest correlation between homelessness and homeless rates is the vacancy rate, right? Like the number of units we have, and the correlation to the number of units we have is how expensive it is to build those units. And the thing we need to figure out how to do, we need to do these, and these are deeply affordable, supported, permanent housing.
Permanently, yes.
But everything else we need to do needs to be, how do we build more units? And we're going to build 2 units at workforce housing for every one of these we're going to build, right? And the housing stock that opens up, and how do we do the workforce housing programs that Maura is proposing?
Right, which we're desperate.
And workforce housing is, that's not a less needy housing piece of the housing market. They can't afford market housing.
I'd actually say it's much higher than homelessness. I mean, I just, the number of people who have not been able to take jobs, and it's workforce housing through moderate income. The number of people who have not been able to accept jobs in
And why is
this state in
Middlebury-
the last year are directly related to housing.
And why is Middlebury a partner of ours in this? Because they can't attract tenured faculty, and they can't attract dining services.
Yeah, exactly, both at the same time.
Correct.
And yeah, so I guess my question for you on the 500,000 unit in Middlebury is what are you hoping Maura's financing will drop that down to per unit in terms of cost.
Well, that's still a cost. I mean,
So
the
that
cost is
is
a
still
cost.
gonna cost $500,000.
The issue is how much
How
does the
much
state
do
have
we-
to kick in
Exactly.
in order to be able to build that? And the other distinction I do want to make about that project, and the reason that the green part is so low, the debt part, is because there are 2 Vermonts, right? Those first 3 projects are in Chittenden County. And because we're doing mixed income housing, we have market units in those, and those support a much greater slug of permanent debt. Those rents, and even the tax credit rents, are lower outside of Chittenden County. And we are restricted on what we can charge. You know, we can charge what 60% of area median income can afford, and 60% of area median income is calculated on area median income. And the area median incomes are so much lower outside of Chittenden County that the revenues of these are much smaller, and we can't service big slugs of debt. Tax credits capped. The only other way is to apply for other sources.
So the debt was restricted because of the potential income, because the
Yeah,
income
income's
was
way less, so we
restricted.
can afford less debt.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Do you, can I ask you a question? The housing trust, they have a, like a redo every 15 years, and the corporations that they establish
Mm-hmm.
need to be redone.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have that also when you do these projects, that kind of structure?
I think so when you do a low income housing tax credit project,
Probably not using the right word.
No, well, the limited partner needs to be in the deal for 15 years, right?
Okay.
Sort of the tax credit compliance period. And so at 15 years, you typically buy out the limited partner, and the limited partner is either, you know, Evernorth's investment fund, or, you know, any other out-of-state syndicate, you know, that you can typically bring in,
Yes.
be the
Yes,
LP,
yes.
right? So you do restructure, typically buy them out, and the agreements up front are that they're bought out for a cost that is expected and that the community can support. Yeah, we do that.
Okay.
I think our claim to fame is that we don't always recapitalize at that.
Okay,
Um,
that's interesting.
we are able to, so we've done, again, those 20 low-income housing tax credit
Yeah.
projects you saw. The first of those was done in 1995. And
That was your first project.
yeah, and we was one of the first in the States, our low-income, or independent senior living community in South Burlington. We then did independent senior living in Rutland, the ones in New Hampshire. We haven't had to refinance those using public money. And that gets to, on our property management side, as owners, knowing that we're gonna hold these, we're gonna invest in these communities, and we pride ourselves on going a long time without needing to come back for public money.
All right,
And this gets into a whole nother policy topic
Yeah.
that we shouldn't get into now.
not
I
now,
think
but sometime,
that
please,
is like
because that's really important.
Advanced class, that's
Correct.
our next, that's advanced class.
I'm
That's
here
next.
for that one. whenever.
Okay, good.
But
good.
yes, that's a huge thing.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
suffice to say, we try to, if you walked into our 1995 built independent senior living community, you'd be impressed with the condition of it, you'd be impressed with the amenities offered, and you'd be impressed by the team on the ground there.
Cool.
And that's without any other.
But
public
you
investment.
might not be impressed by all the energy efficiency that has changed and developed since then.
Correct.
And so there are probably issues and interests in
Mhm.
operating some of that. But we have 7 minutes, so Zeke, I'd love to have you finish your presentation.
Sure. I think this is the visual that is probably the most helpful for everybody to look at.
Yeah, and discouraging, you see.
I know. I think the takeaways are everything we do, we look at a lens of how do we build more units. I mean, once you've taken care of the basic things we need to do, when Gus, when Maura, when everybody are in here, and you guys aren't appropriations, I know, but the regulatory piece is real. Regulation costs money. Regulation chills. You guys have to make a policy decision about.
Uncertainty chills.
Correct.
You said planning for regulation, we can plan for it, chills, but the most chilling is the uncertainty.
Yeah, and again, what it costs to build is one of the biggest correlations to whether you're gonna have high homelessness. I mean, there's a great article in the New York Times in November that sort of looked at Houston versus Dallas and then compared that to LA, right? And in one state, Houston's building for $200,000 a unit, they accept sprawl. They just made that moral decision that we will accept sprawl. They have very little homelessness, some other reasons. Dallas, no. has higher level, they're doing 450, close to what we're doing. LA costing $800,000. There are urban economics in there too, but that's really the closest correlation to rates of homelessness. We have the second highest rate of homelessness in the state, in the country. We've sort of made
Per capita.
We've made the regulatory decision that, you know, we want to limit the amount of development and we want to increase what's in that development to the point where it's going to cost a certain amount. It's going to result in less development. Here we are.
So the thing you haven't addressed here, and the thing that is one of your greatest hurdles, is the uncertainty of appeals. And because the NRB did not come to us with any consent, they could not come to consensus on the appeals piece. We're maybe tackling that, and hopefully will, because it's a huge area that we need to tackle because it's a big hurdle.
There's language in 709 about that, right?
What, Bill?
We're not
We don't
talking
know-
about
We
750.
don't know anything about
We're
that.
talking about appeals, and we're talking about Act 250.
Yeah.
Do you have recommendations on what we might do in reducing the number of appeals and increasing certainty and time frame with appeals?
I will preface this by saying I have no original thoughts. Everything I sort of say is ideas I've heard out there, which I think will be helpful, right? Raising the number of people it takes to bring an appeal. You know, if the courts, you can really mandate the courts hear appeals in 60 days, something like that. I mean, that's been one of the biggest issues recently, is how long it takes.
Right, so time.
Yes, I don't know how you force the judiciary to hire more judges or prioritize environmental court hearings, whatever.
We have more judges in e-court, so that,
Yeah, okay.
okay.
And then I think the biggest controversial one is just having appellants have skin in the game, right? And
Having
needing-
what?
Skin in the game, needing to bond, needing to post a bond. Quite honestly, a lot of the appeals I've heard of, I've never been part of one. We don't do projects that are going to be subject to Act 250, right? Because of that, but a lot of it is a NIMBY argument couched in the criterion of Act 250, right? But at the end of the day, it's about not wanting to see a certain style building, not wanting to lose a field, not wanting to do something like that, right? So I think there are probably valid appeals too. I'm not saying that's everyone, but making sure the appellant is coming with the right reasons. If there's going to be one, I don't know how you do that other than have some appellants get in the game. And I'm sure you'll hear arguments both ways on that one.
Oh, we already have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful, Wendy.
One more question.
We have-
So all of the things that may be talked about in this building about housing and Act 250, most of them are gonna take time to fully implement. The tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, the tier 3 maps aren't gonna be ready for years.
Mhm.
So you can't really do tier 1 until you have tier 3. So perhaps we should consider extending those exemptions that we did that
Hey,
expire
there's an idea.
in 2026. Maybe they should go farther and maybe be tweaked a little bit, but since we did agree to them last year, we might be able to agree to them again. So is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the exemptions provided in tier 1 are like the base minimum if we're serious about this that we have to do. And so I know you can't, I think you can do tier 1 and tier 3 simultaneously, because that just sort of pinches tier 2, right? There's gonna be no real overlap or border dispute between tier 3 and tier 1, likely. It's just gonna then see what's left between those two for tier 2 is how I sort of understand it. Because tier 1, the thresholds are towns that want it, public infrastructure, professional zoning.
Right.
All the
That's-
stuff we've already.
You
But-
can do that without worrying about the ridge lines.
But there's going to be areas inside tier 1s that are tier 3s.
And that may be the biggest issue with that program,
Yes.
is that it's just gonna turn into a map fight.
Yes,
You
and
know.
a 3-year at least map fight is what.
I don't think it's gonna be 3 years, but it definitely depends on bubbling up. It is dependent on beginning at the municipal level and
And
getting a
under-
consensus
and under-
agreement on that.
Underlying assumption we're all making there is that Act 250 is still important, even in towns with with professional zoning. And I think we need to I would argue that as policymakers go through this, starting to understand that Act 250 really should go away everywhere, that there is professional zoning, public infrastructure, all of that is sort of the baseline argument I'm trying to make. And so if we're arguing like whether a park should be tier 3 within, we should leave that to the town. I mean, that shouldn't be a state NRB mapping exercise.
And,
Yeah,
and that
but
is where we are a divided legislature, because some of us are actually very supportive of Act 250.
I know.
With tweaks and with changes, absolutely, but I'm sorry, it's, for me, an incredibly important foundation of.
And I'm not dismissing what it's done for the state, and I'm not dismissing the value in some situations of what it's been, right, and what state input is, but there are policy trade-offs. We've got the second highest rate of homelessness in the country,
Oh, yeah.
the lowest vacancy rate in the country.
You can't
one of
put
the
that
highest.
all on Act 250. I'm sorry, I think that's unfair.
I totally agree.
And on that happy
It's hard.
note, we're going to have to shift our gears.
Yep.
We would love further input, and if you think about the appeals process and other ways we can work on that, because that is going to be a thorny challenge as we go forward, but I think it's one we want to include in this bill. I think there is some consensus on here that we want to tackle the thorny thing.
One thing also, which we haven't really talked about as much, that is the issue of time.
Well-
The extent to which the entire process, reformed or otherwise, takes time, how the timeline can be reduced, because that has to be a major issue, both in terms of cost and delivery.
Yeah, time matters, for sure. Yeah. Thank you all.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, Zeke.
Call me back anytime.
Bill,
We're here.
Bill, Bill.
We're here for you.
I want to come whenever I get to Burlington. I'd love to come and see your latest project. Very excited.
Anytime.
Yeah.
That is
And you're based in Burlington,
We're
right?
right in South Burlington. We're around the corner from that. Yeah, we're actually, our offices are in the bottom floor of our first low-income housing tax credit independent senior project, the Pine Senior Living in South.
The one that needs heat pumps.
And there are programs we're working with GMP on
I-
that right now.
Right, no, I mean, I'm having redone and gutted a house in 1991 and 92.
Yep.
I know what was really not on people's radars then.
Yeah.
So it is interesting what has to be renovated,
Mhm.
changed.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
More to
Thank you.
follow. This is just the beginning.
Absolutely. Whenever, at your
And
convenience.
anything you see that we are discussing and as we develop our bill, feel free to continue to weigh in.
We will. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So
My turn,
we-
sir.
we are, Amy Chester is joining us via virtual Amy Chester. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having
Amy
me.
is going to, well, Amy, you can tell us what you're going to do, but we would love to hear from you, because I remember, I was reminded by our chair this morning that you did a lot of work. This is blending our flood recovery and housing work. You did a lot of work, I guess, at NYU after Irene.
So, I mean, we've done a lot of work after Irene, but we actually began after Hurricane Sandy. And I'm going to share with you our origin story, but we've been working with communities locally, nationally, and internationally on adapting
Right.
to climate change for the past 10
Right,
years.
we take it away, introduce yourself and welcome our, you are new to our committee, so we're just gonna quickly introduce ourselves.
Oh,
And our chair is sadly, hors de combat, and is feeling a little under the weather, and so she is joining us remotely. But I'm Allison Clarkson, I'm the vice chair of the committee, and the majority leader in the Senate, and
Ann Cummings, and I represent Washington District.
oh, and I'm Windsor County. Randy?
Randy Brock, Franklin County and part of Grand Isle, and I'm the Senate Minority Leader.
Wendy Harrison, Wyndham County, which is in the southeast corner of the state.
And Keisha, our chair, is with us, but Keisha, you want to say hi?
Just welcome, Amy. We've
thank
spoken.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me. I really
So-
appreciate it.
Welcome, Amy. It's wonderful to have you introduce yourself and tell us if we could fill the whole screen.
Yes.
I don't know who's managing this, Amy
It's
or
mine,
Magali.
it's coming. It's just a little slow this
Great,
morning.
thank you. This is
Kinda like
terrific.
me. Great to have this opportunity to come before your committee. I really appreciate it. going to tell you just a little bit about Rebuild by Design, and then I'll talk to you about some of our recommendations for Vermont.
Amy, could you turn your volume up a little bit, because we're not able to hear you quite as well as we'd like.
Okay, I can also take off my headset if needed, so let me know. Is that better?
Guys, can you hear
It's
her?
not.
Not very well. We can't.
Is that better?
Yes.
Great. So this is Hurricane Sandy hitting the Northeast United States now 11 years ago, and this was our origin story.
Amy, if you could just begin by introducing yourself, who you are, what you represent.
Absolutely. So I am Amy Chester, and I am the managing director of Rebuild by Design. Rebuild by Design is located in at NYU in New York, which is where I am right now. But we work with communities locally, nationally, and internationally on adapting to climate change. And this was kind of our start. This was Hurricane Sandy hitting the Northeast 11 years ago. And what it revealed to us is the connection between social resilience and physical resilience, that you can't solve for one without the other. And that was kind of the origin of Rebuild by Design. And Rebuild was created originally by President Obama's Hurricane Sandy Task Force. We have since become our own nonprofit at NYU, but we were created because typical design processes didn't work in an area where you weren't sure what the answers are. So usually in a design process, I saw right before me was an affordable housing developer. If you're developing affordable housing, you know how many units you can pay for, you know where it's going to be, you know what your timeline is, and you back into it. Same thing if you're developing a school or a hospital. But after Hurricane Sandy, we didn't really have the answers. So we created our own process. We called it a design detour at the time, and it was a very collaborative process to do research together, to understand an issue from all different perspectives, and then to design whether it's a physical space or policy. And that's what we've been doing for the past 10 years. And we do it in collaboration with stakeholders because, well, I should give you my background. My personal background is I was a community organizer in the late 90s and a student organizer. And then I worked inside government for 10 years, working for the city council. I was a chief of staff, working for Mayor Bloomberg. I was on his team that created Plan YC, which was his big environmental agenda. And then I developed affordable housing at our city's public housing, which is called NYCHA, the New York City Public Housing. And then I've been at Rebuild for 10 years. So the way that we think about stakeholders is not only community groups, it's like landowners, it's all the government agencies that have a say in your permitting. It's all different types of people that we want to bring to the table in everything that we do. And out of our initial process, which was Hurricane Sandy, we were awarded by HUD $930 million to implement 7 projects. So we had this 8-month process, which was very much a collaboration. HUD awarded 7 projects, $930 million. And now, 11 years later, those same 7 projects have $4.3 billion of climate infrastructure in the Northeast United States. This is New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And then we took that same approach, and we have now worked with many different communities around the world, with many different, usually cities, not only cities, sometimes it's counties, sometimes it's state, and it's usually to adapt to climate change. So let me tell you how we come to Vermont. We saw this quote in Vermont, and I'm not saying anything against Mr. Harrington, who I hear is a really lovely, lovely person. But we saw this quote about how Vermont is a little unique and we don't deal with major disasters on a regular basis. And
that has changed.
That has changed. This was only in September, and we actually know that that's not true. This is the images from Vermont. We put out a Atlas of Disasters, what we call it, which is all about Vermont, just the state of Vermont. And what we found is that Vermont had 17 federally declared disasters for extreme weather between 2011 and 2021. And Vermont is ranked 7th in the United States. So that is, for a relatively smaller state, that is tremendous. Every single county in Vermont had 4 or more disasters, and 6 counties with at least 10 disasters, the highest being Washington County.
Congratulations.
Put out this
Yay.
report to give Vermonters an idea of what's happening, and to really change the discussion from climate change is coming to climate change is here. So we put out the Atlas of Disaster. On the left-hand side, you can see the number of disaster declarations. The right-hand side, the map is where FEMA put public assistance. It's individual assistance and HMGP. So it's hazard mitigation assistance and individual assistance, where their money went. And then we added it up, including HUD's money to get $370 million. And per capita, Vermont ranks 5th in the nation for how much federal dollars have gone to after disasters. You can see that right here. So Vermont is tied with Alabama, Texas, and West Virginia, and follows California, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Iowa, and Tennessee.
Per capita, that's per capita.
Okay.
Per capita.
I'll show you this. On the left-hand side is disaster occurrences. On the right-hand side is per capita.
Yep,
Okay, thank you.
it says at the top. Amy, have you presented this to the administration?
No, I haven't. I'd love the opportunity though.
Yeah,
Or
that
to the
would be
natural
great.
resources committees?
No,
Yeah.
I just,
We'll get you there.
okay, that's awesome. I'm writing it down. I just presented this to the Ways and Means Committee and the Assembly last Friday, but that's it.
Right, okay, great.
I would absolutely love to. And then we actually published the data. So you can see it in the report. You can zoom in and see exactly what dollars went to what county for what storm, what type of experiences of extreme weather you have been experiencing, and specifically which counties are faring the worst. We also published the Social Vulnerability Index, which is just the federal data, and the Energy Reliability Index, which was this data set called SAIDI, that ranks the areas that have the least reliable energy. And then we also took that red disaster map and we overlaid Senate and Assembly districts. And we do this as hopefully a tool, so you can look at this and see who are the other legislators that are affected by this. And maybe you can create a coalition and go to the state and do what you're doing now, which is trying to figure out how to respond. The Vermont report was part of a bigger report that we did across the United States that we had issued a couple of months before. And that's part of the Atlas of Disaster. And I want to highlight two things that are in that report that might be very helpful to you. One is a step-by-step guide for states to build a collaborative program over designing and implementing infrastructure. And the other one is new financing tools, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. When we put all of that data together for the entire US, and this is the disaster occurrence map, what we found is that 90% of US counties had a federal disaster declaration for extreme weather between 2011 and 2021. And we took this to the White House, we took it to FEMA, we took it to HUD and Department of Energy, and they were honestly as shocked as we were. We couldn't believe how high it is. And that's why it's really important. And our message is that climate change is no longer coming. It's actually here. And it's our responsibility to do something about it. So the second part of my presentation is going to be about sustainable sources for long-term climate adaptation funding for Vermont. And one of the things that we did for the Atlas of Disaster is we worked with financiers to model how much a 2% surcharge on certain types of property and casualty insurance could raise if we backed out medical malpractice and workers' compensation. So we took all P&C insurance and backed out the pieces that didn't have anything to do with flooding or other disasters. And then if you were to bond that over 10 years, we were able to show every single state how much it could raise. And in Vermont, it could raise $600 million in 10 years. So that's an enormous amount of dollars. And we really like the insurance surcharge idea because it's progressive, not progressive in, Republican or Democrat or right or left, but progressive because it is a surge charge for people that have more wealth. So if someone is lower income, if they live in affordable housing, like the last presenter had, they likely don't even have apartment insurance, but maybe they have car insurance. But as you are wealthier and you own more property or you own more cars, you own a boat, whatever it might be, then you'd be paying a little bit more. We like that it goes directly back into making those insured people who are paying for it more resilient, and that it can decrease insurance premiums over time. FEMA has this great program called the Community Rating System. And if you are in an area that has, that's in a flood zone, 100-year flood zone, and have flood insurance, if you can show that you have created resilient infrastructure through policy and for actual, physical infrastructure, you can reduce those premiums by 5 to 45%. And we also love that a predictable source of income can seed a new industry. It can support jobs because people will come and work and know that there's going to be more. You can also institutionalize equity in the program because you can go kind of line by line at different types of property and casualty insurance. And you can exclude, for instance, lower income people. You can exclude affordable housing, for instance. So we really like the bill that's in before you, Senate Version 145. It's a little bit different than what we propose because what that bill does is it backs into a specific amount and says we want to raise this much from insurance instead of it being a percentage. And if you do a percentage, it can go up over time or it can go down, but it's more predictable for you to be able to plan. The second thing that I think is really important in any process for allocating dollars for infrastructure is to say where the dollars are going to go. And we did this in New York. In New York, I'll talk about it in a second. We did all of the research and strategy and coalition building that convinced Governor Cuomo to create what is called an Environmental Bond Act. He introduced it as a $3 billion bond act. And what they did very smartly is the legislature created buckets of the type of the type of projects that it would go to support. So it was a $1.1 billion for water infrastructure, $250 million for retreat, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very predictable to, in that case, it was voters, but it's very predictable to the public of what this charge would support. The other thing that we really like is the idea of creating a state superfund. You have legislation for that as well that would hold polluters accountable because their profits would go back into making communities more resilient. And that could raise about $2.5 billion. My last couple of slides is just to show you that voters are voting for this. And I know that you can't do the equivalent of a voting measure, a bond act in Vermont, but I share this because no matter where you are across the country, voters are voting yes for these measures. People really want to know that they're going to be safe in the future. And as I mentioned before, the information that we pulled together, which started out as that very simple map, we brought it to Governor Cuomo, who introduced a $3 billion bond act during COVID lockdown. It was raised by Governor Hochul, and she raised it to $4.2 billion. And that was approved by voters last November. And actually, the Bond Act got more votes than our governor. The last thing I'll show you is just 3 projects, because we always get the question of like, yes, but what could it pay for? And these are large scale projects that came out of the original Rebuild by Design competition that are being implemented right now, but they kind of give you a sense of like what you can do with it. The first one is the Big U. It's in Lower Manhattan, and it's 2.2 miles. It goes around the tip of Lower Manhattan, which is the area that's in a flood zone. And it creates multi-purpose infrastructure such as new parks and seating areas and bicycle lanes. And it builds it into the fabric of the city. So instead of being divided from your neighborhoods and the water through a wall, it's actually creating parks and doing it in a much more how should I say this? A much more like attractive way, a way that people like want to live. It gives people a chance to think about how they want to live in the future.
Attractive and usable floodplains. Amy, I hate to do this because this is so stimulating, but we need to sadly finish, and we will ask you back because this is great. But if you could finish
no problem. It's just the last 2 slides were other projects. Happy to take any questions.
Sorry, wait, hold on one sec. Anne has a question.
No, I just wondered, where is 145?
I thought it was with you.
I have not seen it.
The
It's
super
above
fund?
off.
No,
No, the
well, the
superfund.
Senate 145, the bill you referenced, I think it's in GovOps, Jamie.
Okay, because the whole insurance thing would come to finance and.
It should come to finance. We could
Right.
ask Ruth to alleviate, and then you could actually have that until we get the Ways and Means thing on this education fund. It would be.
Well,
I believe that one of the people with lived experience has not made it today, so
We have one, okay, great.
do a little
Could we
more
do
time.
5 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Amy, I hate to do this, but can you do this in 5 minutes? I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna show you 2 other projects. I'm done. We can talk.
Great. So that's great. You're creating more floodplain in Lower Manhattan, which already there is some, but not enough.
What we're basically doing is taking the floodplain and adding 8 to 10 feet. So we're raising up the tip of Manhattan all the way around in different ways. Some parts it's a park, some parts it's a bike lane, and it changes.
And Amy, just before you finishing your 5 minutes, Keisha has a question.
Yeah, I think Amy was
Keisha.
saying that she's happy to do questions for these 5 minutes if others
Yes.
have questions too.
Exactly.
I have 2 questions sort of really unique to what we're not unique to Vermont, but I think the unique to adaptation as a challenge. One, I don't think state legislatures, and I'll put at least us in this category, know enough about flood insurance and what might lower our rates when we do good governance. So more information about that would be helpful. And 2, workforce, does your team at NYU kind of replace being able to hire professional hydraulic engineers, et cetera? Like that's, we need more nonprofits that help design this work, because every community we have is asking for professional help and we can't find it.
Okay. Well,
And our own, just tag onto that, our own Agency of Natural Resources, probably to do the mitigation work that's going to be required in terms of planning, is also going to need more help. And we're going to clearly need more workforce on all of this.
absolutely. I'll take the second question first. So we don't replace hydraulic engineers or architects or designers, but what we do is we're very process oriented. So we bring in the experts according to what a community needs, and then they work together and they come up with the plan, and we help get it implemented as best as we can. And I do agree with you. Legislators all around the country don't have the capacity to know this. I mean, I only know it because I've been working at it for 10 years. It's very hard to think about it. So we can absolutely put you in touch with other people or other processes and work with you on figuring that piece out. Happy to create a teach-in for you. Maybe it'd be like a half day where we have experts talking about what maybe their expertise is and what you want to learn, and we can match that. That's not a problem at all. Would be happy to do that. On workforce is such an interesting issue. As soon as we created the proposal to New York State, we worked with AECOM to do a jobs analysis. And that jobs analysis became on the tip of everybody's tongue for the next year, talking about that it could raise 84,000 jobs. So, create 84,000 jobs. The workforce piece of this is really crucial. And I think that's why the predictability of knowing that you have funding that's going to come over a period of time, people will come to Vermont to work, or will open up their practices there, which would be very exciting. And then on the flood insurance, I'm happy to connect you to FEMA. FEMA has something called the Community Rating System. And I understand that seven Vermont communities are part of that. And what that does is allow the communities to take community-wide action. Let's say it's on the policy, like strengthening building codes or like building a seawall. And if you take those actions, it will take a percentage off everybody's insurance. And you should just know that flood insurance is, well, a couple of things. One, it's only for the flood zone, even though 50% of floods happen outside the flood zone. And
Right,
it tends to be that outside the flood zone, only commercial places have that flood insurance. Usually most people don't have it because they don't know.
Yeah, we're clear on that, given that how expensive it is.
Perhaps if you have a friendly voice on flood insurance from FEMA we're just hearing people can barely get the information. and FEMA has not, I don't think, been as forthcoming on the ground about this information. So if you have a
Right.
better
Yeah,
contact.
I think it's
Great.
different people in FEMA. Like this is the DC
Right.
FEMA, not the local FEMA. So that's where
Yes.
it gets harder. But we'll
Yes.
definitely put you in
Yeah.
touch.
So, and our Vermont Emergency Management Team, Eric, they're a huge resource in identifying the right people too. But if you could send us the people you think we should speak to, that would be great. Any concluding remarks, Amy Chester?
Just to say that we are available to help you in any way possible. We really want states to create lasting infrastructure sources so communities can become more resilient and no longer suffer.
Thank you. And thank you for your
so
help. Eye-opening, wonderful testimony, much appreciated. We will get this to both of our natural resources committees and hope that they are wise enough to spend, I think, 20 minutes to half an hour with you, because 15 minutes is way too short. So thank you so much. This was really terrific. Thank you, Keisha, for connecting us.
Thank you,
and
Chairwoman.
yeah, this was great.
Thanks.
We are going to shift gears a tiny bit here. And Magali, would you be kind enough to push Megan back to 11 and tell Gus we're going to start at 11:15, because we can't, we're going to need to start, we're going to need to shift gears. If people need to take a break.
I was gonna ask if we could put 5-minute break or just do it on our own.
Are we okay with taking a 5-minute break now? I know a lot of you have been early, but if we start at 10:30 and just wait, some of us just need to stretch our legs. We've been sitting here for a while. Is that okay?
Yes.
We're gonna go off live and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Thank you.